What if the endless explanations you offer others are actually preventing you from hearing the one voice that matters most? Your own? You find yourself constantly translating your feelings into acceptable language, justifying your need for rest, explaining your boundaries as if they're negotiable, apologizing for taking up space. This compulsive explaining drains your energy and distances you from your own truth. When did you start believing your existence required a permission slip signed by others? This pattern often begins in childhood. You learn that certain emotions were too much, too loud, too messy, too inconvenient. So you started editing yourself, trimming your authentic expressions to fit into comfortable boxes that wouldn't disturb anyone. The problem is, when you constantly explain yourself, you're not communicating, you're negotiating your right to feel what you feel. Your feelings don't need justification. They need your presence. There's a crucial difference between sharing your truth and begging for validation. When you find yourself over-explaining, you're often operating from that childhood fear. If you don't make yourself perfectly understood, you'll be abandoned or rejected. But here's the psychological truth. No amount of explaining can make someone understand you if they're not willing to listen. The right people don't need exhaustive explanations. They understand the language of your soul. Think about the last time you felt compelled to justify your emotions. That urge to explain wasn't about communication. It was about seeking safety. You were trying to preemptively soothe the potential discomfort others might feel about your authentic experience. But your emotional world isn't a problem to be solved or justified. It's a landscape to be explored and honored. What would change if you stopped treating your feelings like emergencies that need immediate explanation? The healing begins when you recognize that not everything requires translation. Some experiences are meant to be felt, not explained. Some truths are meant to be lived, not defended. Your pain doesn't need a PowerPoint presentation to be valid. Your joy doesn't need a committee approval to be celebrated. The moment you stop explaining is the moment you start trusting your own experience. This doesn't mean becoming closed off or uncommunicative. It means shifting from explaining to expressing. Explanation comes from fear of being misunderstood, judged, or abandoned. Expression comes from authenticity, the simple sharing of what's true for you without attachment to how it's received. One drains you, the other nourishes you. Consider the energy difference. When you're explaining, your body tenses, your breath shallow, your words rushed. When you're simply expressing, there's a natural flow, an ease, a sense of alignment. The first feels like pleading, the second feels like sharing. Your truth doesn't need to convince anyone to be true. The practice of conscious silence becomes revolutionary in this context. Not the silence of suppression or fear, but the silence of choice. The silence that says, I'm listening to myself right now. The silence that creates space for your intuition to speak louder than your fears. This intentional silence isn't empty. It's full of potential understanding. What wisdom might emerge if you stop filling every quiet moment with explanations? As you practice this conscious silence, you'll notice something profound. The people who truly care about you don't need constant explanations. They're comfortable with your process. They trust that you'll share what matters when you're ready. Meanwhile, those who demand endless justifications often reveal their own inability to sit with discomfort, theirs or yours. This journey requires distinguishing between healthy communication and compulsive explaining. Healthy communication builds connection. Compulsive explaining seeks validation. One comes from fullness, the other from lack. When you communicate from your truth, you're sharing. When you explain compulsively, you're begging for acceptance. Stop explaining your soul to people who only want to analyze its packaging. The transformation occurs when you realize that your worth isn't determined by how well you can justify your existence. You don't need to earn the right to feel what you feel. Your emotions are valid because you're experiencing them, not because you can present compelling evidence for their existence. This shift from justification to acceptance is where true healing begins. Think about the areas where you over-explain most frequently. Your boundaries? Your need for alone time? Your creative choices? Your emotional responses? These are often the places where your self-trust needs strengthening. Each time you choose not to over-explain, you're building that self-trust muscle. What boundary have you been over-explaining that actually needs no explanation at all? The people who matter will respect your boundaries without needing a dissertation on why they're necessary. The people who don't respect them won't be convinced by any amount of explaining. Your energy is better spent honoring your boundaries than justifying them to those who fundamentally disagree with your right to have them. This isn't about becoming rigid or uncompromising. It's about recognizing that some things are non-negotiable, like your right to self-care, your need for respect, your emotional well-being. These don't require explanations. They require honor. When you stop explaining these core needs, you start embodying them. There's incredible power in the simple statement, "This is what I need." No justification, no apology, no lengthy backstory, just the clear expression of your truth. This kind of communication may feel uncomfortable at first, especially if you're used to cushioning every request with explanations, but it's incredibly freeing. As you practice this new way of being, you'll notice your relationships shifting. The connections that survive will be deeper and more authentic because they're based on mutual respect rather than performance. The ones that fade were likely maintained by your constant emotional labor of translation and justification. What relationships might transform if you stop doing the emotional labor of over-explaining? The most profound healing often happens in the quiet spaces between words. In the moments when you choose to listen to your own heart instead of explaining it to others. In the decision to trust your experience without seeking external validation. This is where you rediscover yourself, not the version you've been explaining to everyone else, but the authentic being who's been waiting beneath all those words. Your truth doesn't need to be understood by everyone to be true. Your path doesn't need to make sense to anyone but you. Your healing doesn't require witnesses or approval. The most important understanding is the one you cultivate with yourself. When you truly understand and accept yourself, the need for constant external validation naturally diminishes. If you're tired of explaining, if you're exhausted from translating your soul into acceptable language, please know your liberation awaits in the quiet spaces, in the moments you choose not to explain, in the boundaries you set without apology, in the truths you hold without needing to convince anyone. What one thing will you stop explaining today to start hearing yourself more clearly? I'd be honored to hear about your journey in the comments below. Share one area where you're practicing the power of not over-explaining or one boundary you're learning to hold without justification. Your experience could help someone else find their way back to their own truth. If this exploration of quiet self-trust resonated with you, please support our community by liking this video and subscribing to Winds of Thought. Together, we're learning to listen to the wisdom that emerges when we stop explaining and start being. And if you know someone who needs permission to stop justifying their existence, share this with them. Sometimes the greatest gift we can offer is the reminder that some truths need no translation.